The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this January 14th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com Pacific Time, and you can also catch my show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time if you can't listen in the evening. And if you can't listen to either of those programs, go to my website at www.arcticbeacon, that's ARCTICBEACON.com, and you can catch all my programs right there. Today I'm going to discuss the irregularities in the Tony Alamo criminal trial, a trial that to me showed Rome's evil hand working through our court system. And I say that because I looked at it as a lawyer, even though I'm just a law school JD graduate. And I looked at this case and found out that there were so many irregularities in it that I called it worse than a kangaroo court. And I said even kangaroos wouldn't want their name on this case. So today we're going to talk about the irregularities of that case, and I'm going to go back and go over a number of things. And let me tell you why. For the past 2 or 3 months, I've been sending out over 20 press releases daily to get the story out to publications that are not on the internet. Well, they probably are, but I'm talking about small-town newspapers. First, I started with big newspapers, big radio stations, big TV stations. Then I moved into the regional area. And out of the hundreds I've sent out, and I'm still doing it daily, I've gotten 7 or 8 requests to do interviews, and we're in a process of working them out, and these aren't as easy as just someone calling me who knows me on the internet. Many of them have asked me to summarize the irregularities of this case and do it from a point of view of my investigative research. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm putting together these interviews so that I can show to people that this case was a travesty of justice. And my hope is that his sentence, that's Tony's 175-year sentence, is commuted, and he's pardoned and let out of jail. He spent enough time there for crimes he hasn't committed. He first was sentenced once to, I believe, 6 years in jail. I think he spent 4 years for bogus IRS charges, and I researched that and found out that they had actually stolen his books. And that was proven, but the courts overlooked it. That means the FBI, so that he couldn't prove his innocence. And that is an interesting case. So he was put in jail on bogus charges there. Then I related that to the Tupper Saucy case. And Tupper wrote the book Rulers of Evil, and there's a lot of people right now. In fact, I did a show on it yesterday, and I've done numerous shows. I'm one of the few people still who have chatted with Tupper before he died, talked to him a number of times. And a lot of people have now started to read that book, and they're finding out that it's impossible to look at the history of the United States, the formation of this country, without looking at the Jesuit order's influence. Tony was very ahead of his time talking about this, even back in the 80s. He's one of the first people that allowed Alberto Rivera, a Jesuit priest who had defected and became a Christian, and spoke about Jesuit infiltration in churches in America. And what I mean by that is the ecumenical movement. And I showed you just over the holidays how I went to a service at a church in the LA area. And basically talked about how that was most likely a Jesuit-infiltrated church. The pastor who was bald, and look up the occult history of baldness. It's interesting. But a lot of these pastors for the these churches are bald. Now, I'm not saying that maybe some are actually really bald, but many of them shave their heads. Now, there's a occult significance to that. Look it up. But anyway, let's forget about the baldness and talk about, at the end of his service, he gave the devil horn sign, and it quickly was given, and then his hands clasped in prayer. So that to me showed what Alberto Rivera was talking about, how all these churches calling themselves Protestant, non-denominational Christian churches are really fronts for the Vatican, because they don't even get into criticism regarding the book of Revelation, talking about the Vatican institution as the Antichrist, which our Protestant reformers talked about. They want to keep all criticism away from that organization. Recently, I showed you exactly who they worship, and they worship Lucifer. And in a ceremony in the Vatican, you can go to this. It was about a year ago. Just put Pope Francis worships Lucifer, and you'll find in Latin they tell you that. Translated in Latin, they actually say this is we worship Lucifer. What more evidence do you need? Now, if they worship Lucifer, in turn, I said they must believe in God. So think about that. And they believe in God, but do not want to, let me just say this. They do not, when they worship Lucifer, they have made the decision to take God away as the supreme being, the commander-in-chief, so to speak. So you figure that one out. There's so many people, did you realize they were involved with the New Age movement to basically take away belief systems of people? They love any atheist out there. That's what they're, how many Catholics? I mean, I was the same way. I got so fed up with being a Catholic, I became an atheist. They love that. And they have figured out a way to basically infiltrate most every denomination on the face of this earth. And there's a lot of research that still needs to be done on it. But anyway, these are some of the things that I've always said the reason they framed Tony Alamo was because of what he was saying. Read some of the things he wrote back in the 80s when no one was talking about the Vatican. He had it right on the money. Well, anyway, I got back showing you that he was convicted of an IRS bogus charge. I mean, it's amazing. They had stolen his book, so he couldn't prove his innocence. And then I related that to the Tupper Sassi case. After Tupper Sassi had written a book called Miracle on Main Street and was basically showing us back at a time in the early 80s when no one was talking about this stuff, the illegality of our banking system, the Federal Reserve System, and it caught on like a wildfire. And so basically the IRS came down on him, and he found out after he was convicted of a misdemeanor. And even that conviction on a misdemeanor was bogus. When you look at it, he showed they made up a law to get him finally, because the three other charges they had on him were dropped, where the jury found him innocent on. And then he decided he wasn't going to jail because he was working on a book right then regarding the Martin Luther King assassination and who really did it. And he figured if he ever went into jail, he'd never come out. So he went on the lam for 10 years and wrote Rulers of Evil, but during that time he also found out that the prosecutor in his case was actually a Jesuit priest. So here we have another man who basically, many people now, you can go to a number of websites now, are talking about his book, showing this connection between the Jesuit order and our founding fathers. And he paid the ultimate price. He finally... after 10 years on the lam, he went and he served, I believe, a year in jail for what he did. Now, if you look at the original charge, a misdemeanor like he was charged with, even though it was bogus, usually gets a slap in the wrist and a fine. He got the maximum sentence of 1.5 years, I believe. Amazing. So anyway, I wanted to get into this discussion regarding the irregularities of the Tony Alamo case, and I'm going to do that. But first, let me do this. There's been a lot of rumors going around, and I got, I don't know how many emails. I had mentioned once on my show that my place of where I live was burglarized. And I usually do not bring up my personal life on these radio shows because it only creates confusion and people misinterpret things. And I found that, I try to tell people a lot about my past so they realize who they're talking to. But as far as, personal things, I try to leave that out. I think everyone has a bit of a right to privacy, even someone who puts himself out on the radio. So I put that out there, and let me assure you, and so I've gotten so many different emails, people writing emails to people saying, oh, Greg's really in trouble and blah, 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 and he's going to lose his place of living. No, that's not the case. My place was burglarized, which is a shock. I mentioned it because I was a bit shook up, because I'd lost some important items like radio equipment, a camera, a very good Nikon camera that I've had for years, and several other things. But they can all be replaced. Everything's fine. And so please, no more rumors about I'm in bad shape or anything like that. God always provides. Also, I received, and I've mentioned this before, this goes with the territory. For 10 years I've been doing this show, and I'm not a stranger to threats, things like that. It's happened to me a number of times, and you've heard about the time my dog was in trouble and things like that. I also went back to 1982, May 26, to a UPI story where I was almost a victim of terrorism. Basically, the bomb going off in the newspaper before Reagan was coming, about 3 seconds after I was in that same hallway. So, I'm no stranger to this. I've had death threats recently, but these are just ridiculous. And all I wanted to say is that it happens, and really, it always makes me feel this way. That, it makes me understand that if you think about that, your death is imminent and soon. Now, what do I mean by soon? Well, 75 years could be soon, but it always is a reminder, if you think that way, that you can make your best decisions realizing that your time is short on this earth. And so don't worry about these things. It happens, and it's just something that the people that work on the COINTEL side like to do sometimes to people, just to maybe upset you a bit, maybe to get you off of your game plan, so to speak. But it never does with me anymore. And in fact, there's so many people that paid the ultimate price that I never really consider my situation grave at all. Many people have emailed me and said, how have you stayed alive like this? And I said, that's not something I ever think about. So don't worry, no more rumors, no more emails. I'm fine. Everything is fine. And let's concentrate on the people that really have been targeted. And one is Tony Alamo. And so I wanted to look at, and for this 12 minutes, and then we'll move into the second, I got 12 minutes left here. We'll move into the second half hour. And the reason I want to do this is a number of stations that want me to talk about these irregularities, and I have to go back now and prepare it. And hopefully somebody out there, please send this show around, because I know there's got to be somebody out there that wants to help this man get out of jail. And I'd like to see it happen this year. And I really mean that. Because I said, we talk about going into 2016. It started out pretty rocky, and it's not going to get. So a lot of things are going on from the side of, the moving forward of this old world order. But there's going to be a lot of good things that happen this year as well. So let's talk about these irregularities. Let's look at some of the irregularities in his case. And I'm going through the documents as I speak. Now, according to some of his recent appeals to get a new trial, the documents were long, and you have to go through this with a fine-tooth comb to really understand how this legal machine works. There's an affidavit that's attached to his document which lays evidence to what I said in my original shows I did over the years regarding this case, which outlined that the first attorney he had took his case and collected $350,000 and then promised to do a good job, but then instead went on a vacation, never really did work, and was never available and basically did nothing. Now, I said a long time ago, it's not proven, you can't prove it, but what does it tell you? Who benefited here? Well, the attorney didn't do his job. He probably was working together with the prosecution in a sense, basically give a front for a good defense. And he finally dropped out and was fired. And there were a couple of them. And then an affidavit came across my desk, and I've got the document, I've had it in front of me. It was given to the court in 2012. And shows, when you read this, he didn't get a fair trial, but do you think the judge even read it? He probably had one of his law clerks read it. Because they weren't going to listen to anything here. Any legal way they could maneuver to keep him in jail, they were going to do it. Many of the witnesses that were called to on his behalf were never contacted by the defense. That's totally unbelievable. Now, let's remember what he was charged with. They couldn't charge. Now, if you read these internet stories, he's this child-abusing cult leader. And it's amazing. When you really get to know this ministry, it's completely opposite. And they said he was charged with child abuse and all these sex charges. Well, that's not true. He was charged with the Mann Act. They couldn't find any evidence to charge him with child abuse or sex charges. So they had to use it's kind of like the RICO thing they did with that's not a good analogy, but let me say what the Mann Act was. What is the Mann Act? It was put on the books. It's an archaic law put there, and the reason they did it was to stop pimps from taking prostitutes across state lines for sex purposes. And this was a way, if they could prove they took these women across state lines, they could charge them with the sex charge, even though they didn't have solid evidence of the prostitution. Now, they could charge a person with prostitution if they caught them in the act, of course, and they could, of course, charge Tony with sex charges if they had reliable witnesses that said he was a sex violator, but they couldn't do that. So they used this Mann Act because Tony used to take his ministry and kids on the buses across state lines. For example, they have a ministry in California, one in Arkansas, and a couple others around the country. So they used this document. They used this archaic law to do that, which is not meant to be used for a minute. He's not a pimp. These girls weren't prostitutes. And so this is the legal loophole they had to use because they had no solid evidence, first, that he was ever convicted of any or ever did anything wrong. It's unbelievable. Well, when they want you folks, they'll come around. Ask Tupper Saucy. When they want to get you, they will get you. And you'd at least, wouldn't you? Listen to this. So they don't call these witnesses on his behalf. Wouldn't you at least contact them if you were the defense attorney? You're getting paid all this money. If they'd be a good witness or not to find out. That's one of the, I worked for criminal lawyers. And one of the things we used to do is he would say to me, Greg, we got a whole bunch of things. Find some information here. See what we can find out if this really happened. And go check out every witness possible. And that's what you do. And then you come back with a summary. Okay, this is what they say. This isn't a reliable. This one, this witness is, So you go through this, but they didn't even bother them. And there were so many people they contacted on Tony's behalf that never got a chance to speak. They never were even contacted. And this is verified. The document also states that people were working to help these attorneys from the Alamo ministry, had communications with attorneys. People had communications in advance of this trial in order to testify on his behalf. Now, as Tony was detained pre-trial, these people participated on his behalf in assisting with the investigation conducted by his defense by providing the names and contact information for witnesses who might help him exonerate himself, who had useful testimony at trial. Now this is important, wouldn't it? To rebut what I consider to be flimsy charges using the Mann Act. This provided to defense investigator David McGonigal with a list of witnesses in March and April of 2009. This gave him sufficient time to at least contact them, didn't it? Yeah. And guess what? They were never contacted. And I know that for a fact because I talked to some of the people. Never, ever contacted. Who are some of these people? I wrote them down. Included Terry White, Nina Romero, Marianne Barnett, Tom Barnett, Brian Broderick, Deborah Ondrasek, Vicki Larson, Tamara Reed, Dennis Hagan, Angela Ondrasek, Sally Demelin, Mary Jane Sheff, David Sheff, Rebecca Kunin, Rose Pachatko, Peter Pachatko, Maureen Kunin, Mark Kunin, Brendan Broderick, Shirley Gibson, John Pugh, John Peeler, and Don Sweet. All this is public record. None of these witnesses. Were these attorneys disbarred? No. They were lauded probably and paid off, on top of the money that was given to them by the Alamo ministry. None of these witnesses, which I just read, were called at the Alamo criminal trial. Most of them were not even contacted. And that to me is just completely insane and ridiculous. It's not a fair trial. Many of these people were just forgotten about. And that to me is just incredible. So, can you imagine? With that as the beginning, what kind of trial would this be? He had only a 10-day trial. Now, I've seen, and I've said this many times, I've seen petty larceny cases go on longer than that. 10 days, no witnesses on his behalf allowed to testify, even though they had evidence. One or two even had evidence that were FBI informants who proved that said they were set up to bring this man down, which, if a jury hears that, they're not going to convict him. Now, even without a fair trial, even without any witnesses coming on his behalf, guess what happens? The jury and I'm going to skip ahead here and then come back to some of the other irregularities, but one that strikes me as one of the most important is before a jury goes in to deliberation, the judge gives legal instructions on what the law is. Now, he gave his instructions. The jury goes into deliberation, and then you'll see many times in trials the jury will send notes back asking questions. And one of the questions that came out was, if we can't find any evidence that he was a child abuser or any sex crimes were committed, can we still convict him? Now, the judge, he skirted that, because to me that is like, all right, if you're up for let's say you burglarize somebody's house, and you can't find any evidence that the guy did it, and there's no forensic evidence, no anything, can we still convict them just based on hearsay? They would say in this case, yes. It's ridiculous. So the judge said, just read my instructions. So, can you convict a person in our criminal system when there's no evidence that he did the crime? Nothing? Yes, this is a perfect example. And that's why I call it worse than a kangaroo court. That's why a man sits in jail right now. Somebody, please take this story and give it to somebody and have this sentence commuted. Will you get it to the governor? Get it to the president? I don't care who you get it to. And maybe if we make, the reason they don't want to talk about this case anymore, they just convict him, send him away, throw away the key. Everybody makes their comments that he is the worst thing since, worst bat, what they've destroyed his name in the press even before he was convicted, and then they just forget about it, move on to something else. Well, I'm sending out these press releases so that maybe somebody that's done this in their newspaper, and many of these newspapers covered this story, has a conscience and will look at what they did. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal on this January 14th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and this, of course, is FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, isn't it incredible? I'm going through the irregularities in the Tony Alamo case. Isn't it just incredible that this went on? And people ask me, why do you cover this story? And I'm going, well, if you don't cover this, who else is doing it? Who else is spending the time? I'm telling you something. That when you see this happen, when you see your freedom of speech, your freedom of religion taken away from someone else, you can bet that it's only a matter of time before yours is gone as well. Oh, you can have your freedoms if you just shut up, if you don't want to look for the truth, if you want to live this scam that they've put forth to you. Oh, you can have a great life, right? No. So I do this story for one reason, and I said it a long time ago. Until we get justice here, I'm not going to forget about it. And hopefully, somebody will listen somewhere, somehow, some way to get Tony out of jail. And that is my hope. And I'm presenting some of the things that happened during this trial that some of these radio stations that I've talked to want to hear. And I'm sending this to them as well, along with a press release I've done. So make sure this show gets out or back to me, so I can, or maybe somebody do a YouTube on it, and then I can include it in my press releases so that we can maybe get somebody's ear here to see what exactly happened. Now, many people will say, well, you have a, I took this case on because it was a third-party, disinterested journalist that saw something happen. And I also took it on because I've done many, many stories regarding the Vatican and their intrigue and their corruption in our country and who they really are. And since Tony was basically hounded for the same thing, I felt that the more I could talk about the Vatican and show that he was talking not only just, it wasn't hate speech like they've tried to say I do all the time. It wasn't anti-Catholic. I don't hate Catholics. I grew up as a Catholic. It's the institution I'm talking about that lied about who they really are and are lying to you this day. And so by doing all these stories that I do on the Vatican, it lays more evidence the fact that this man was sentenced to this unbelievable 175 years, basically for his stance on telling you the truth about this organization. And the more stories that I do about the Vatican and the Jesuit order, the more you should understand that this is why this man's in jail. So that's beside the point on the criminal trial. But it's a good, you got to say, well, why did they go after him? And you have to also ask, why don't they really go after all these priests? Do you realize there's not been one Catholic church? They don't shut down a Catholic church. They don't shut down the school. They don't take their children. They don't, where they send most of these priests? To some halfway house that's run by the Vatican to rehabilitate them. Rehabilitate what they've done. Not only has the Pope been found, and this was Ratzinger, to send letters to bishops stating, do not testify or give information to the authorities about any sex crimes. Basically what he's doing is saying to them, break the law. And by that document, he broke the law. But did anything happen to him? Here we have a case where people wanted to come and testify about why Tony was getting railroaded, and they wouldn't let them. But in the same time, when you find information about the Vatican and exactly what they said to these bishops to keep all of their sex crimes, do not cooperate with the authorities, what is that? That's criminal offense. But that's not even prosecuted, is it? Along with many sex crimes that just go put under the table, and then they send these priests to the so-called rehabilitation halfway houses, and then guess what happens to them? They get sent into another country or something to do the same darn thing all over again. That's the hypocrisy we live under. Now, one person from the Alamo ministry met with this guy, McGonigal. He was the investigator regarding testimony on Tony's behalf, but many of the people who wanted to testify never met with defense attorneys to review potential testimony. And at the meeting with McGonigal, with this one person who talked to me, said he took some notes, but did very little to prepare me, said one person who took the witness stand on Tony's behalf. Now, the failure of this preparation to me is prejudicial to the Alamo case, isn't it? How can you give a man a fair trial if you don't prepare? And that's stated in the documents. And it wasn't as if he had a supposed flimsy, defense attorney that was given to him by the state. He paid good money to get a good representation and got nothing. Had attorneys prepared witnesses, even interviewed them, they could have testified, I think, in great detail about the alleged victims and their interest in making the trips in question, as well as how these witnesses turned on Tony, were used and coerced by the government to give this testimony out. And in the end, several of them recanted. And that wasn't even enough to get a retrial. Because they didn't want a retrial. They wanted to put him away. Now, in the Mann Act Traveling across state lines with a minor to have sex is a crime. All these witnesses. Now, listen to me. What was the Mann Act originally put there for? It was, in a sense, to stop these criminals from taking prostitutes or women across state lines for sexual purposes. But they used it here because Tony used to have these trips with his ministry across to to his other ministries. All these witnesses that never got a chance to testify were going to show there was never any intent for sex on these trips, and never anything occurred, and that the ministry took many trips in buses or in cars to their different locations across state lines. Now, the witnesses could have told more about the purposes of these trips, some of which were their interest in seeing new and exciting places, and they wanted to be close to where exciting things were happening in the church. Trips were also made to pass out information. And some of this information, of course, was detrimental to the Vatican. There was a focus, however, just on Tony's purpose of travel, which was not the issue before the jury's consideration. The issue was what was the purpose of the travel? Why did these 4 or 5 girls go on these trips? I might add, 3 of these girls went to Wellspring, or I think, I'm not sure, maybe even more. Wellspring being a place that is used now, it's the offspring of the Cult Awareness Network, that's used by the FBI in order to take them there, counsel them, coerce them into testifying, getting the testimony they want. They were coerced there for weeks. They were interrogated. They were coached on what to say. Now, is that an independent testimony of a man who committed something? No. They were coached on what to say in order to make sure this guy was put away. Now, in past shows, I went over a document sent to the court by John Peeler. Now, if John was he was a informant, worked with the FBI, and was assigned to bring down Tony Alamo, and he talked about it on my show many times. In fact, Tony and John were on my show, and John apologized to Tony. In fact, John left the FBI because of this, because he couldn't find anything wrong with Tony, and in fact, they had even asked him to maybe do him in. They wanted to bring guns there. Tony wouldn't accept it. They were trying every way under the sun to get him, and in fact, Peeler, when he left the FBI, warned Tony that they were coming after him. Now, he's an undercover FBI agent who told me that the government has asked for his services to bring this ministry down, and he had tons of information about how the government was setting up Tony for years and framing him, which the jury never heard. Now, the judge, because of Peeler not being called to testify, was never asked to rule. If the defense doesn't call him, the judge doesn't have to rule that this testimony is either relevant or irrelevant, isn't it? Which on appeal would be a huge issue. But think about this. Isn't it relevant? Now, the government that's prosecuting him actually sent in somebody to bring him down, to make him commit a crime, and he didn't? Now, that to me is very relevant. And it was never heard by the jury. I don't see how any court could get around that fact, that this is not relevant information. So if you're in cahoots with the defense attorney who doesn't call somebody, that makes it harder on appeal to get this case overturned, doesn't it? So it's a little club, just a little fancy club here, who, on both sides, working together to make sure this man gets thrown in jail. And I'm not saying there aren't good attorneys out there, but they weren't anywhere near this court in Fork, Arkansas. And there are people out there who are respectable, who uphold what justice should be, but there's a lot of corruption, folks, and especially at this level. There's a lot of finagling between defense attorneys and prosecutors, and it's a little club. I know it. I worked in it, so to speak. Sometimes things go on that you would not even believe. Now, the reason Peeler wasn't called is very, very strange. He gave an affidavit to the court, which means that if it is false, he can be jailed for perjury, right? Here's what Peeler said. Let's go over this. And I went over this before, but it's necessary for the interviews I want to do at these stations. But Peeler said this, and I'll bring Peeler on. I, John Peeler, am a resident of Arkansas and have been for years. Now, this is an affidavit to the court. He could be found guilty of perjury. Now, he's even given to me names of his superiors. And what more do you want? So he's putting his neck on the line because he saw this man being framed. Did he get a chance to testify? Even this red? No. I, John Peeler, am a resident of Arkansas and have been for years. Prior to Tony Alamo's trial in July of 2009, I was contacted by Mr. Alamo's attorneys regarding information I had, so they contacted him concerning Mr. Alamo and circumstances of the investigation that led to his arrest and prosecution. During my conversation with Mr. Alamo's counsel, I expressed my willingness to testify in Mr. Alamo's trial as a subpoenaed hostile witness. I stayed in contact with several members of the Alamo Foundation, including member Don Sweet, during the same period leading up to Mr. Alamo's trial. According to members of the Alamo Foundation, Mr. Alamo's counsel informed me on several different occasions that they planned to have a subpoena issued for my testimony. The Alamo Foundation members called me several times prior to trial to ask if I had received a subpoena yet. I never did. I was never contacted by Mr. Alamo's counsel again to discuss my potential testimony and was never asked to testify at trial. Now, what happened between the time when the defense counsel says he's going to testify and then he didn't? Was there a conversation with the prosecutor? This testimony could have maybe led to Tony's acquittal when you hear that what Peeler had to say, and I'm saying this. Peeler then said, at trial, I would have testified to the following matters. I was a former Violent Crimes Task Force operative, an informant, employee assigned to undercover operations for different governmental agencies. I was sworn in by Honorable George Howard, Jr., the United States District Court for the District of Arkansas in 1998. Present at my swearing in were FBI agents Glenn Gordon and Bill Buford. I've listened to his testimony regarding what he was asked to do by the government. I have, which would have shown that they were trying to frame this man for years. If the defense doesn't call him, my question is why? And if their answer is, well, we can't prove that he was an actual employee of the FBI or an undercover agent, here's the deal. First of all, he can prove it. First of all, you have to understand that the FBI and the CIA can wipe you off the books at will if they want to, and you don't know what I mean by, you know what I mean by that. He never worked here? No, we don't have any records of that. Oh, one push of the computer button and they're gone. Now the point is, with these names, Glenn Gordon and Bill Buford, and his sworn testimony, he could have went to jail. Why don't they bring them on to testify? Would they lie as well? Sure they would. Bring them up on the stand and then do the same digging. Maybe some other people will come out of the woodwork to prove that this man actually is telling the truth. They don't want to go there, do they? But it wasn't done. To me, it was a miscarriage of justice. A defense attorney who's either in bed with the prosecution or is just there to collect the money and get the hell out as quick as he can. It's just amazing to me. Tony has already spent years in prison. His appeal has been sitting on the desk and then denied for years. Is there anybody out there that knows of the Innocence Project? Yes, I thought about that in the past. But I'm convinced that the Innocence Project is probably controlled by the Jesuits as well. I see these TV shows that are getting people out of jail that don't belong there. Is there anybody out there who can lend assistance to this man? And when I say this, I say it in sincerity. Let's get to the bottom of this because our freedoms hang in the balance. And this can do this to him. They can do it to anybody. And you bet they can. Oh, and you'll sit back and say, well, if I keep my mouth shut, nothing will happen. Well, if you keep your mouth shut, you're just as guilty as those who are doing this to him. And you also have an obligation to find out what's going on in your world here. John Peeler said that he was assigned to infiltrate Alamo's church and its business operations with the goal of finding some kind of criminal evidence against him. He spoke with numerous people in his church. He spoke with Alamo on a number of occasions, and after years of investigating him, he found no evidence of criminal activity in either his personal life or business operations. Despite this lack of evidence that he presented to the Violent Crime Task Force, they continued to push him to find something they could use against him. So basically, they were trying to frame him, right? These situations were set up in an effort to find Alamo engaging in criminal activity. However, none were successful. Tony Alamo took no drugs, took no money, took no weapons. So this guy Peeler was infiltrating, trying to get him to do something wrong, similar to what the Branch Davidians were found to do. And he didn't. He wanted nothing to do with anything illegal. And Peeler said this: when I relayed this information to the Violent Crimes Task Force, Agents Glenn Gordon, Bill Buford, and FBI agent Kenneth Petros became very upset with me. They were intent on prosecuting him, and when I could not report back to them with any evidence of criminal activity, they wanted me to fabricate this evidence. And I refused. Now, I talked to him many times, Peeler many times, and he emphasized the fact that they were out to get this man. Because, and I said, was it because of the Vatican? And he said, yes. I refused and subsequently left the Violent Crimes Task Force. Since then, my son John Christopher Peeler has been subjected to repeated threats and harassment from them, the Little Rock Police, and the government agencies. And wait till you hear what happened to his son. He's been in jail for a murder charge. He was in the Army at the time that he never committed. Now, since then, my son John, like he said, has been threatened, etc., etc. This is what he said to the court by affidavit in November 2012. As of today, nothing has been done. The judge is still, Tony still sits in jail. Peeler has come on my show numerous times to talk on his behalf. This show gets muted by the mainstream. That's why I started sending out all these press releases in hopes to get this out there. And I said I'd keep doing it because how many people are really concerned? This travesty of justice needs to be talked about. And we haven't even gotten into the irregularities of the testimony by the 5 girls who basically who they coerced to testify. We haven't even gotten in, and you can go back to some of my other shows, and I will do that as well in another show, perhaps next week. When you see that, then you start really wondering. This whole thing was, like I said, worse than a kangaroo court. So, I hope that, let me see how much time I got. I maybe have 6 minutes here, or 5 minutes. But let me just say this: when Tony was when he was not in jail, Peeler on my show apologized to Tony for what he did. And I have that on record. You can go back to some of my shows. After Tony was put in jail, Peeler then came on my show a couple times and talked about these irregularities. And if I called him today, he'd come on again, and maybe I'll have him on next week again and see if anything else has happened. And I think if he could have testified, and there was a couple other FBI agents, one other that I know that wanted to testify. Now, if this could be proven, I doubt if these charges would have stuck, but for some reason they weren't. Peeler never got to testify. He was given an affidavit subjecting himself to perjury, like I said, in jail time. If this wasn't true, that's enough for investigators to really get into this. But do they really want to investigate it? It appears to me they don't. There's an affidavit from other people that came on this show because there's about 90 pages of different people with reasons why they should have been called to testify, to discredit or show that the charges against him have been trumped up. 90 pages. Nothing got into court. There were 4 or 5 complainants who had come forth with this evidence in violation of the Mann Act. And we can show, and that's where I'm going to leave it right now, because I've done on other shows showing this testimony was coerced. And we've had people on that were at the trial showing that they were being coached. And some of them even afterwards have recanted and said they lied and were coerced. That wasn't enough. So what have we here? We have a travesty of justice. We have a man who was put in jail for all these years, and a ministry who they're trying to tear apart by not only... we didn't even get into the cases regarding child services and all the kids that were taken illegally from their parents. And then now the civil cases going on to strip them of their land. You want to talk about Oregon. They're taking land from this ministry just as we speak. And has that been talked about? No. So think about it again. Look at this, please, if you're out there and if you're listening to my show, send this to people. Send it anywhere. Put it to somebody, do a YouTube on it. I got, until I get some of my radio equipment, I can't do some YouTubes now. But anyway, I will continue to do. And I want you to understand, there's a number of stories in the past I've done regarding the testimony of these girls, which were coerced, some who were recanted afterwards, showing this was a complete travesty of justice. And what I would like to see done, my main concern is to get this guy out of jail this year. Let's see if we could, say some prayers too regarding this case. Maybe that'll help. And you know what? The messages here I get that come to me from people when Tony sends his messages out are all positive. Can you imagine me worrying about little things that happen here? And this guy stands strong while his freedom has been taken away? I mean, come on, there's so many people that have so many more difficult things and they've stood for right. Let's stand behind those people and forget about our little worries here. And maybe this show will have some effect. Somebody somewhere to listen to this. And if you're in the legal profession, take a look at it yourself. And perhaps, I don't have much concern about the Innocence Project. And I'm sure I've been told that's infiltrated as well, because I was thinking of going to them, and I said that's probably ridiculous. So anyway, I only have about a minute left. And in this minute, I want you to really think about this case. I'm bringing the irregularities that are obvious. So much more behind the scenes went into this case to get this man and this ministry taken away, remove them from the face of the earth because of their stance. And it is a travesty in both freedom of speech, in our showing the control of our criminal justice system. It's showing that really the Constitution has no really teeth in it anymore, does it? And the type of defense that this man got, I mean, these lawyers, I don't know how they sleep at night. I guess they sleep on top. Their pillows filled with a lot of money, I bet, and they love it, and they just smell it, and they live it. And that's probably all they have, because I don't know how they could sleep at night by giving a defense like this. We're all out of time. I'm going to ask you again, send the show around, make a YouTube, send it back to me, and we'll be back tomorrow, Friday, on the Investigative Journal. Thanks for listening, and come back to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. My show's on every Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Pacific time. See you tomorrow.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.